the honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and as always, it's an honour to be able to enter into debate in this place and to talk about the important issues facing Canadians. But Madam Speaker, if you would give me just a little bit of latitude here, as this will likely be the last time I stand up in this place before we all break for Christmas, whether that be tomorrow or in the next couple of days. So, Madam Speaker, I would wish you and all members of this place, as well as all Canadians watching, a very Merry Christmas and many blessings in the new year. So thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for that. And further, just to acknowledge, Madam Speaker, I know one of your colleagues and a colleague of us all passing away yesterday, the late Honourable Jim Carr, just to acknowledge his service to this country, many years in this place. And although disagreements on many issues, I know that it's at times like this where we see the true heart of Canadian democracy when looking back at one's legacy and one's record. And certainly on behalf of myself and the people of Battle River Crowfoot, to pass condolences along to you and your colleagues, as well as the late Mr. Carr's constituents and family and friends, who I have no doubt are grieving his loss. Madam Speaker, as we discuss the issue of Bill C-18, we see before us something that I would suggest is typical of the way that the Liberals approach many aspects of government. You have them making accusations to Conservatives about somehow we are supporting, Facebook and other social media companies and their monopoly of the internet, where, Madam Speaker, I would like to take a moment to refute that. First, I have never heard that really anybody suggests that social media is overly favorable to Conservatives. But, Madam Speaker, I would like to unpack a little bit as to why the very foundation of this bill, I would suggest, is problematic. And I'm going to unpack that to the very basis that assumes that a government agency, and in this case specifically the CRTC, should become intimately involved and exercise a great deal of authority over something that I think that all Canadians, or certainly most Canadians that I speak with, truly support, and that is freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and free expression on forums and avenues like the internet, including social media. So, Madam Speaker, I think that one of the concerns certainly that I have is that the very foundational elements of what is proposed here is to increase the size, the scope, and the authority that an agency of government has. And, Madam Speaker, I would suggest to you that at the very foundation of what this bill is doing, that is deeply problematic. Now, it's been mentioned that Conservatives ran on a plan to ensure that big tech pays their fair share, and absolutely. However, when we look at Bill C-18 and what is included in this bill, we see that it misses the mark, because it, instead of attempting to do what I think many Canadians actually support, the government instead simply increases the size of bureaucracy. And as we've seen throughout the committee study, we have seen how what the Liberals have said this bill does versus and how much it will cost versus what this bill could actually, the consequences of this bill will be, and the actual cost are two different worlds. Now, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, I do find that this is par for the course for these Liberals, who are great at making announcements, great at doing press releases, and even writing preambles to bills. However, in many cases, when you look past the preamble, that's where the concerns and the problems are made very, very clear. So, Madam Speaker, I am, if you can believe it, I'm going to cut my speech a little bit short here today to ensure that some other colleagues have a chance to get up and speak to this important bill. But I would simply highlight something that has been missing from the conversation, and that is rural voices. So specifically, I think that it should be noted, as one of my colleagues did just a few minutes ago, it should be noted that rural is missing out on the conversation, and the biggest beneficiary of this bill will be the CBC. Madam Speaker, when I have, it's about 14 weekly newspapers, some of which don't even have a website, local radio stations. Madam Speaker, and in some cases, there are small newspapers, family-owned businesses, in some cases multi-generational operations that will not benefit from anything to do with this sort of bill. So, Madam Speaker, at the very foundation, I find this bill flawed. How it's granting massive authority and jurisdiction to the CRTC when it has difficulty fulfilling its current mandate, let alone a greatly expanded one. And, Madam Speaker, I would look at almost anything that this government touches. The service outcomes of any department over the last 7 years certainly have not been improved. So I hope you'll forgive me, Madam Speaker, for not trusting that a massive expansion of the scope of an agency of the government, I find that deeply problematic. But, Madam Speaker, I would simply conclude by saying this. More bureaucracy and administration is not the solution. We need to see that freedom of the press is preserved, freedom of expression is preserved in this country. And when it comes to ensuring that the big tech players in Canada pay their fair share, I fear, will create a bloated administration that falls far short of the mark that is required to actually deliver on what the objective when first introduced this bill was to bring forward. So, Madam Speaker, with that, I will conclude a whole 4 minutes early and look forward to answering questions from my colleagues.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the member from Battle River Crowfoot. Thank you for his intervention. And I'm wondering if he has read the latest report from Australia, where they have just reviewed their similar legislation 1 year in and found, in fact, journalism was supported. In fact, the smaller outlets in Australia did better in comparison than the larger organizations, and it has been a success. And I'm wondering why the member thinks that it would be different in Canada.
Honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question. But here it comes down to the reality of what we are debating here today, which is not the Australian model, but rather a Liberal proposal to give a massive increased mandate and authority to an agency of the Crown here in this country that has a very poor track record at accomplishing the things that the government already expects it to do. So, Madam Speaker, again, I would ask that you forgive me for suggesting that I have significant doubts as to whether or not the CRTC would be able to, A, fulfill the mandate that is being suggested that it needs to within this bill, and B, actually support journalists when the Parliamentary Budget Officer not only said that the cost would be more than double what the government estimated, but that up to 75% of the revenue would not go to small, local, and independent journalists, of which I'm proud to have 14 independent weekly newspapers in my constituency, but would rather go to the already $1.2 billion funded CBC. Madam Speaker, this is not Australia, this is Canada, and I think the Liberals should look very carefully before voting on their bill, which is based on something that's very different than what has been proposed, reported on, and seen from the country of Australia on the other side of the planet.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Madam Speaker, let's have a few numbers. 98% is the share of Facebook's income that comes from advertising. 80%, that's the share of what Google and Facebook take from online advertising. $193 million, that's Meta's numbers for 2021, thanks to journalistic content, let's specify. And during that time, local and regional media are at the bottom of the barrel. But we know if there was a framework that meant that revenue would be shared, according to Info Canada, which made prepared a report, $620 million could go to paying 700 journalists. In Canada, Facebook makes much more money from the media than they pay to them. Are we not dealing with inequality and injustice?
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I think I would simply respond to that question with another question. and that is, does that member trust this Prime Minister to actually fulfill the stated objectives that are outlined in this bill? Does that member trust the CRTC, a federal Crown agency, to actually fulfill the stated objectives in this bill? And Madam Speaker, when I look at what this bill is stated to accomplish versus what is outlined in the substance of the bill versus the testimony that we heard in committee that casts significant doubt on whether it would be able to do so, Madam Speaker, there are oceans of difference between those three things, and to me suggests that it would be deeply problematic. So it's a laudable objective. However, Madam Speaker, we see a deeply problematic follow-through on the part of the government, and I would urge that member to consider carefully whether or not he would entrust the CRTC with that much authority.
And last question from the Honourable Member for Nunavut.
And I thank the member for his intervention. I've lived in a time when major cuts were made to CBC and the impacts that had on my community in Nunavut. In Nunavut, CBC is the only provider that consistently and reliably provides broadcasting in Inuktitut. And I wonder if the member could share with us whether he agrees that my community deserves to get some of that lion's share of revenue so that more Indigenous languages can be broadcasted through CBC in other parts of the country.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question. However, I would suggest that this bill does not accomplish what that member simply asked me whether or not I support. So yes, I absolutely support Indigenous languages needing to have coverage. In fact, I have found it deeply problematic that while CBC has not faced cuts, they have cut service. Madam Speaker, I think that it highlights a great discrepancy that exists here as to what this bill is purported to accomplish versus what will actually take place, because my fear is for that member from Nunavut, Madam Speaker, is I agree there needs to be support for those small local stations, whether that be radio, newspaper, whatever the case is. But Madam Speaker, this bill, pure and simple, when I read through both the bill, the testimony, and what it is purported to accomplish, does not do that justice. So, Madam Speaker, simply put, would that member, again, trust this Prime Minister to accomplish those objectives when the framework that is proposed in C-18 simply does not exist?
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.